Picture this. You're a kid. You're handed a house key, told to lock the door behind you, and left to just figure it out. No helicopter parents hovering around, no participation trophies, and honestly, nobody really watching. Most people today are either talking about boomers or obsessing over millennials. But there's this generation quietly sitting right in the middle, the one that actually completely rewired how we handle pressure, identity, and independence. And they've been hiding right in plain sight. This is the psychology of Generation X. And once you understand it, you'll never look at this generation or yourself the same way again. We're talking about people born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They are literally sandwiched between two of the loudest, most culturally dominant generations in history. But here's the crazy psychological twist. That sandwich position didn't make them bitter. It made them bulletproof. Let's rewind a bit. The world Gen X was born into was, frankly, kind of a mess. U.S. divorce rates were hitting record highs during their childhood. The economy was stumbling through oil crises, stagflation, and brutal corporate downsizing. They grew up watching the culture shift from the bright-eyed optimism of the 60s to the gritty, cynical realism of the 70s. All of this happened right during the most formative years of their psychological development. Basically, Gen X was handed the vibe of a rainy Monday morning before they even started kindergarten. And then came the Latchkey phenomenon. Millions of Gen X kids came home to empty houses after school. Parents were working their tails off, sometimes juggling 2 jobs. The divorce revolution meant a lot of kids were suddenly navigating single-parent households. There was no supervision, no carefully curated after-school activities, and nobody there to manage their emotional experiences.
So what did that do to them psychologically? According to developmental psychologists, having that kind of early independence actually conditions the brain to develop something called self-directed coping. It means they learned how to regulate their emotions, solve problems, and make decisions without needing any external validation or a round of applause. In other words, Gen X didn't just survive being left alone, their brains learned from it. But here's where it gets really fascinating and maybe a little heartbreaking. Because that exact same psychological wiring that made Gen X so resilient also gave them a hidden vulnerability that follows them straight into adulthood. Psychologists have identified a few defining traits in Gen X adults, and it paints a pretty incredible picture. Trait 1. Radical self-reliance. Gen X doesn't sit around waiting to be rescued. They don't expect the system to work for them, so they build their own systems. Studies on how different generations work consistently show that Gen X is the most entrepreneurially minded, the most adaptable, and the least likely to need someone cheerleading them to get the job done. They work hard not because someone told them to, but because not working hard was never presented as an option. Think about it. When was the last time you heard a Gen Xer say, "I just really need more recognition from my manager"? Exactly, you haven't. Trait 2. Deep-seated skepticism. These guys came of age during Watergate, the AIDS crisis, and the fall of trusted institutions. They watched the news lie. They watched massive corporations lay off loyal employees without blinking. For Gen X, trust is not a given. It is earned very slowly, and it can be revoked in a heartbeat. This isn't just them being cynical for fun. It's a smart, psychologically adaptive response to a world that repeatedly proved it couldn't be fully trusted. Trait 3. Identity built on doing. Boomers define themselves by movements and ideologies. Millennials define themselves by community and identity labels. But Gen X? They define themselves by what they make and what they do. The whole DIY ethic, the indie music movement, the underground art scene, these weren't just fun trends. They were the psychological expression of a generation that learned, if you want something to exist, you have to build it yourself. Now, remember that hidden vulnerability I mentioned earlier? It's emotional avoidance. Research actually shows that Gen X adults report significantly higher rates of bottling up emotional distress rather than talking about it. The very coping mechanism that built their incredible resilience, handle it alone, don't make a fuss, just keep moving, also made asking for help feel like a personal failure. The psychological term for this is compulsive self-sufficiency, and it's exactly why a Gen Xer can handle a massive crisis at work with stunning, cool-headed calm, but then go home and quietly fall apart without telling a single soul. For Gen X, fear isn't the enemy, neediness is. And that distinction defines almost everything about how they love, work, grieve, and grow. So, what happens when the most quietly resilient generation in modern history hits midlife? Right now, Gen Xers are between 44 and 59 years old. They are running companies, raising teenagers, taking care of aging parents, and doing all of it largely without any public acknowledgement. There are no viral moments for them, no culture wars being fought in their honor, no think pieces analyzing their trauma. They're just doing the work. And psychologically speaking, that is exactly what they expected. Gen X never needed the spotlight, which is precisely why the spotlight never really found them.
But here's what makes this moment genuinely exciting. We are living through the peak leadership era of Generation X right now. The biggest decisions being made today, in boardrooms, in government, in our culture, are being made by a generation whose entire foundation is built on skepticism, resilience, and radical accountability. That is huge. The leaders who don't need the applause are usually the ones who actually get things done. If you had to sum up Gen X's leadership style in one sentence, it would be, I'll fix it, I'm not happy about it, but don't make a fuss. Perhaps the most profound thing about Gen X, though, is this. They are a generation that chose depth over visibility. In an era completely obsessed with social media performance, curated identities, and getting attention, Gen X remains stubbornly, defiantly real. They have zero patience for the superficial. They value loyalty over networking, honesty over comfort, and substance over spectacle. And honestly, in a world drowning in noise, that mindset isn't just admirable, it might be the most necessary thing we have right now. Whether you're Gen X yourself or you just want to better understand the people quietly shaping the world around you, their psychology holds lessons for all of us. Resilience doesn't have to be loud. Identity isn't a performance. Strength doesn't need an audience. If this sparked something for you, hit subscribe, because we dive this deep every single week. And let me know down in the comments, do you think Gen X is the most underrated generation out there? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. I'll see you in the next one.